So welcome everybody. My name is Rita Balogh. I'm a senior manager at the BSA, which is the Software Alliance. I'm responsible for software policy, which also includes everything that is related to data and data policy. Welcome to our panel, which is the user-centered data ecosystem. When we were preparing with Carolyn to this panel, she taught me a new word, which is the datafication of society, which I think is quite accurately describes what we are living at or what we will be living at. I don't know where the future is going. And one of the questions that came up is, do we know the future? And since the future is so unknown and still dynamically changing, how can we regulate the future? So we have really good panelists today who can maybe answer that question from academia, from companies, NGOs, and the government, well, policymakers, which I'm going to introduce in order. So Carolyn, she is a director in Microsoft Technology Policy Unit, which is looking into how the future is going to look like in 20, 40 years, and trying to shape policy accordingly so we have laws that are practical, implementable, and can stand the test of time. She used to work before at Research in Motion, Avaya Communication, Lucent Technology, and Bell Laboratories. We then have Alfred, who's going to talk about how actually users think about data, how people think about data. He's done extensive research on that. He is a professor at Donald Brand School of Information and Computer Science at the University of California, and he used to be a professor in various universities in Germany. We then have Nicolas, who is working at Orange, France Telecom. He's been working with the telecom industry for about 17 years. And he's going to present us some initiatives that Orange is doing with data. Prior to joining Orange Telecom, he used to work at the Boston Consulting Group and Accenture. And Andreas is the current president of EDRi, a very well-known NGO in Brussels. He's also president of the Austrian Association of Internet Users, as well as the Austrian Working Group on Data Retention. And he has specific knowledge on data retention because he was one of those who initiated the Constitutional Court case on the Data Retention Directive, which is now at the ECJ. And last but not least is Rosa. She's very well known in the Brussels era. She's been working on data protection in the Commission in various capacities. In the data protection unit, the EDPS, and now with DG Connect. She's responsible for the e-privacy directive, but also for various self-regulatory initiatives like online behavior advertising. And with that, I'm handing over to our moderator, to Carolyn.
Thank you, Rita, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for this conversation. Just so I get a sense, how many of you were here for the last session which discusses surveys on consumer and user attitudes and behaviors? Great, thank you. Okay, so then I'll know not to repeat or where I should repeat some of the information. So I'll just say a few words to set the context for the conversation this afternoon. As Rita mentioned, what we're looking at is really the increasing datafication of society. And for the emerging, what we really look at for this panel is that with the emerging data-driven ecosystem, for that to be sustainable, it must demonstrate that it delivers value and also is worthy of earning the individual's trust. We've heard a lot about the loss of trust lately. So we title this session a user-centered data ecosystem because we believe that the conversation and the dialogue needs to be on empowering and engaging the individual. Terminology-wise, we use the term user-centered and not user-centric because we believe that this is a conversation around a distributed ecosystem where all stakeholders have equal responsibility to be focused on empowering the individual versus the terminology of user-centric where the individual is solely responsible for controlling the use of their data. So this is a conversation very much about distributed empowerment of the individual. And it's timely to have the dialogue now and to really talk about and discuss what are the mechanisms and innovations that are needed to create this trustworthiness and also to explore valuable data uses. And in a world where data is ubiquitous and it's impossible for individuals to know what data exists about them, it is that much more critical that we start with a dialogue on the focus on the individual and explore alternative uses of data. Today, most policy frameworks are designed top-down, based on high-level abstract, and does not translate well, which may not translate well into reality. We've got plenty of examples of that. What we would like to do is really if we are going to focus on the individual, the question is then, how do we know? What do we know about the individual? And so for this, we really need hard evidence and how to incorporate that evidence into implementations and into policy making. The evidence today is just starting to be built. Really a more holistic conversation on data management, data uses, that broad conversation on data and not just solely from privacy. I know I'm at CPDP, so that may be a controversial sentence or statement, but hopefully you understand what I mean by that. It is a broad conversation around data use. So research has shown that acceptable uses of data is contextual and changes. It's not static, but changes according to personal preferences, social and cultural norms. So for this panel, what we would like to do is to explore these questions in terms of bridging the gap between concept and evidence on how to build sustainable data ecosystems that are focused on the individual. And the dialogue, as Rita already mentioned, is from multiple perspectives. To start with, what I'd like to do is to start with Rosa, to turn to Rosa and ask, from a policymaker perspective, and as you consider appropriate policy approaches for big data, what types of research or initiatives on user attitudes and behaviors regarding personal data would be helpful? What are the results that you would like to see? And if you have any suggestions on bridging conceptual and practical reality? Rosa?
Yes. Thank you, Caroline, and thank you, Rita, for the introduction. I'll try to give my perspective of how I see the problem and how I see the possible areas of research. During our preparatory meetings, I think that is the third time I warned Caroline that I am a lawyer, I work on policy, and I might not answer, as all lawyers, not exactly what she wants to, but I'll do my best to do it. Now, I think that Caroline has described well this new society that we have now and the one we will have in 2040. I never heard before, I must admit, that datification is a new word for me. But I think it's clear that we have more data being collected, more sources of collection, more devices that collect it from us, and more difficult for individuals to know that the data is being collected, and more users. And I think that, as you have anticipated, this is going to stay. This is something that will not change, and it will not change because the technology is here, we have better telecommunications, we have more applications that are interesting, people want to use them, and we have business models built on that, making money, and there is an interest. So this is going to stay. Now, when you apply our existing principle to these new developments, I think it is obvious that there is a certain tension, challenge, and I suppose that the consent, information and the consent, it embodies the challenge, because you are in this new world where data is collected all the time, and the requirement of inform individuals and ask for their informed consent is obvious that it might create a problem, a challenge to fulfill it. Now, when I am, as a policymaker, faced to that, I have to say that I look at this and I have sort of make a dissectomy of solutions that are being put on the table, that we hear that policymakers should explore and researchers should build on. And again, it's a little bit legalistic, but I would say that what we hear is that forget consent. Some people will tell us, I was reading recently the book of Victor Meyer's Schomburger. He was telling that consent is not anymore an effective way to provide information. Consent will not give effective privacy information to individuals. So, Okay, they tell us if you have a cookie consent, remove it because it's not good. Now, is this true? Is this true that it's not good? I don't know. I am not sure if it's not good. I leave it here for further, but this might be an area to look into that. Number 2, other people will tell us, well, no, you cannot remove consent. Individuals will fire back. They will never accept. An individual is capable of choosing a mortgage, and why will not be capable of deciding what to do? So this should stay. Probably within this second sector of solutions, we are told, explore technology. Explore how the technology might be the solution. The technology puts a problem, the technology might give us a solution. And an area that I worked, that it reflects that, is the standard of do not track. Today at 2 o'clock there was this panel on do not track. It showed us how a do not track standard could empower individuals to instruct the browser, so the browser will talk to the publisher, say, yes, I want to be tracked, no. So that will be an area to further explore how technology can help us. Number 3, we hear about fair use. So I guess this is also related to what you were talking, how would you call it? You call it, I forgot, but you had a word for it. Certain situations where an individual will not find himself or herself tricked if his or her consent is not required, could say, so that the use of his or her information is fair. In Europe, I think this has a context in the legitimate use. So you have legal ground to use data if there is a legitimacy which doesn't prejudice. So can we build on that? And what are these situations where an individual will not feel that is unreasonable? Do they change over time? My parents will have felt it different from now. So that will be another area to explore. And the last one is privacy safeguards. We hear a lot. And so the different people will come and say, well, what you need to do is to build accountability regimes, require the company to incorporate in systems safeguards, which can go privacy by design, retention requirement, access limitations, so that you build an ecosystem that it's so safe and good that use the data, use it, nothing will happen, consent might not be necessary, but you are entitled. So these are the 4, how I see the different things that are put on the table for legislators to make choices. And faced to that, I would say that all the theories are interesting. In my view, I don't see them as excluding at each other. I think that there is a scope to build on all of them, and I think that existing law already contains elements of these ones, and that the future law, the data protection regulation, also contains elements of these, but we don't have all what we need yet. Now, going back to a little bit of what I do every day on areas that we are looking at currently in DG Connect, more specifically. I think that we are very interested in exploring what the value of data and how people perceive the value of data, so that they can make an informed choice. In the other panel right now, there was a question on that, and some reference to a study. So under Horizon 2020, we are calling for projects that will explore that, so that basically, if people knew how much the data cost, will they make a different assumption? That's one of the research is focusing on that. Another one is the second that I mentioned before is we are asking for projects that where the technology will empower individuals to exercise their rights. Could be something like the do not track or other sort of technologies, but this is also currently under the Horizon 2020 now. And the third area that I think that is, if not under the research program, but is something that we are brainstorming is the accountability measures. To what extent, and in particular in the context of big data, to what extent the building privacy safeguards could be a solution combined with other, but one of them. So I think I will leave it here. I hope more or less I responded like a lawyer, but maybe the others will have more specific contributions on how to research.
Thank you very much, Rosa. You gave the panel plenty to think about, and thank you very much for your questions and also for sharing the issues and the projects that are top of mind for you within DG Connect. I'd like now to turn to Andreas, representing EDRi, to ask him to speak about what are the users' perspectives on what are trustworthy mechanisms in the world of big data, and also how do they envision being able to control the use of data about them. If there were additional evidence and research available in terms of, for example, how people perceive the value of data, how would you envision using that or leveraging that?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to say that I'm not convinced that the current state of data processing will not change in the future. Because, as we all know, we have a significant enforcement problem in data protection. This is one of the reasons why there is the activity to do a data protection reform, and I hope that better enforcement will quite change the games and maybe also will change the attitude and the business models that currently are in place, because not all of them are really compliant with European data protection law, in my point of view. I think it's important when we talk about this topic to distinguish between the legal basis for data processing that are available. On one hand, we have processing that is required by the law, so we are simply obliged to do this. Companies or state authorities are obliged to do this data processing. Then there is processings that are simply necessary to fulfill a contract, which is another legal ground for data processing. And it was also mentioned the legitimate use, which in my view is already an area where it's getting more complicated when we have a look on what certain internet service providers are currently doing with regard to create evidence for copyright infringements. Then we see that they claim that they have a legitimate interest to process and record the usage data of their users, what they are doing on the internet, in order to give this data to copyright holders to tell them who was infringing potentially infringing their rights. So I think it's very far-stretched at the moment, and we need to narrow this down and to find a very good definition on what legitimate purposes really are and how they can be applied in practice. And I would be really careful with saying that we have a set that is not going to change, because I think we have lots of problems in this area. When it comes to the main point, where it's getting interesting for businesses to get the user involved, to the data subject involved, then we are talking about consent. This means that there is no other legal basis for this processing. Otherwise, businesses would not choose to base their processing on consent, which is a very weak legal ground and a very risky one, because data subjects every moment can say, okay, stop this, I remove my content, and then businesses need to stop their processing, which is certainly not what they want when they base their business model on this processing and all of their revenues. So I think the main point here is that we are talking about data that is not vital for achieving public goals, like being obliged to by the law. We are not talking about data processings that are necessary to fulfill some contracts or something like that, but we are talking about additional processings for the benefit of companies, maybe also in the benefit for users, but I think the commercial interest is very strong in this area. Well, it was already mentioned, the book of Victor Meyer-Schönberger and his criticism on big data and the problems he sees with giving consent. And I think he really has a point there, because when we are talking about big data, then we are talking about an activity that is aiming at gaining additional insights that cannot be gained by just looking at the data. So there are additional methods of analytics applied in order to find out what is not obvious, to get new insights, to get new knowledge out of this data. And so from the beginning, when you start this activity, you do not know what will be the outcome, because it's exactly this adventure that you want to do, to see what is in this data, what additional benefit and what additional information you can get out of this. Last year there has been a study published where they did a project with 58,000 or 60,000 volunteers, users of Facebook, where they analyzed what they can learn from the likes that people do every day. So when Facebook users think some content is really interesting and they enjoy it and think they want to recommend it to anybody else, then they like this content, and only based on this information, on these likes, what kinds of contents people subscribe to with their likes, there was an analysis what can be taken out of this data with big data methods. And some of the findings were not very surprising, so it's relatively easy to figure out the sexual orientation of a user, or the religious beliefs of a user is not too complicated as it seems, also which political party they favor and so on. But I think there was one point in this study that really is astonishing. With 60% accuracy, the researchers were able to tell if the parents of a given user were still together when the user was 21. Only from the likes of the contents on Facebook. So I think it's really self-evident that none of the participants of this study had in mind to give the information if his or her parents still were together at his age of 21 when they were liking some content on Facebook. And this is the reason why I think that Victor Meyer-Schönberger is right with his claim that the meaning of consent, or even the possibility of giving informed consent, because being fully informed of what the consequences of this consent are is one of the legal requirements for it to be valid. And it's getting more and more difficult to give such a consent because you simply do not know what is in the data that you are giving away. And this is, I think, one of the main things that need to be kept in mind also in the discussion on online behavioral advertising, for example, where we also leave our traces, which content we visit, which pages we use, which news we are interested in, and so on. So the next point with such ecosystems, which I understand to more or less collect the data that is available on a given user and to present to the user, okay, look, these data is what we are having, these are the regimes, why we are having it, what we are doing with it, and you now can decide if we are entitled to give this data away to third parties, or if we do some analysis on this. So this is what I understand under such ecosystems. I think it's also evident when we look at the revelations of the last 6 months that such data stores will definitely find the interest of a load of entities, be they public, be they private, be they some secret services or whatsoever, who want to get access to this data and who will have access to this data. So I think we are currently in a position where we cannot simply go on and do as if all these agencies do not exist, but we have a situation where things like cloud computing, like big data, and so on, suffer from the enormous success of one of its implementations, which is the activities of NSA, GCHQ, and all the other agencies who were involved in these activities, because this shows very well how this data can be used against the users and what can be done with it. And therefore, I think we really need to think about how we can reconsider and how we can come back to principles as data minimization, as purpose limitation, and the other principles of data protection that are well established in European law since 1995. And yeah, I think to conclude, one can say consent is hardly to be a basis of big data processings. And on the other hand, of course, systems that improve the ability for data subjects to exercise their rights, so to get access to the data that is stored and processed on them, to have means to correct the data or to have data deleted if it's not necessary anymore, any activities towards this direction that is helping the users and the data subjects to exercise their rights are, of course, very welcome and, in my opinion, also long overdue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andreas, for a very comprehensive list of the risk that can come from the use of data within such an ecosystem. And I think you put the challenges out there for Alfred to start addressing in terms of, so what are some of the innovative ways in which that data can be used to, so let's say even if we look at legitimate processing, what are the applications that may actually deliver what would be perceived as value-added services to the end user? So Alfred will ask you to share with us some of the evidence and then also how this can be implemented.
Thank you. So we had 3 panels on informed consent this morning, and several speakers declared informed consent dead or at least terminally ill. And the same is true for the concept of transparency and control that I regard as a slightly more general. So claims were made that it has failed, that it does not provide people with meaningful control over the data. And terms like red herring, slight of privacy have been used, or big data is the death knell for informed consent. And it's not the case that there were a murderer, so no external reasons, but rather it's human nature that leads to that. The transparency and control paradigm seemingly becomes unwieldy for people, specifically in a world of big data when people are expected to make tons of privacy decisions and also tons of privacy decisions that people regard as unimportant. And also, as we know from many behavioral experiments, it presumes that people are rational decision makers, and we can show that this is not the case. Now, is there still hope? And I present now an idea to rescue transparency and control. If we could reorient transparency and control onto important privacy decisions only, and maybe onto people who have the desire to self-manage their privacy, this could provide some resuscitation of transparency and control. Now, how could we do that? And again, I now present an idea first. And the idea is, if we could predict what privacy decisions people make, and if we could make those privacy decisions on behalf of people, for instance, through personalized privacy settings, and of course allow users to override personalized defaults, and of course monitor any corrections that users apply and use this information about corrections to improve the algorithm for prediction, then we could focus privacy control and privacy decisions on those issues that are important for people. And people would then only be asked to make those privacy decisions that matter for them. Now, of course, is this possible? And I don't know, but I present to you research that points to a strong possibility. And so it's based on experiments where people are being asked to disclose data about themselves, or rather not do that. And as you know, in these experiments, you get extreme variability. People's disclosure behavior differs per person. It differs depending on all sorts of situational context, and it differs on data type, and it also differs per data value. So people who believe that their data deviates from the norm are typically more privacy considerate. How would it be able to predict individual people's privacy decisions? Well, we ran such experiments, and also we got data from other researchers about their experiments. And these experiments, participants were generally asked to disclose personal data about themselves or to indicate whether they would disclose it. You give typically an incentive. Then you check whether or not people disclose this. And what we did then, and this was novel, we tried to find types of data for which people exhibited similar disclosure behavior. So we looked at finding data where people tended to disclose all these data or rather disclose none of these data. We did this through factor analysis. And then we tried to cluster people based on differences in their disclosure behavior with regard to these different types of data. In one experiment, we told people that we would test a recommender system for apps to download. And we asked all sorts of questions and asked them for all sorts of permissions and recorded whether or not they gave these permissions and answered these questions. They were free to decline. And then we analyzed this data and tried to find types of data where individuals showed similar disclosure behavior, and we found that people had similar disclosure behavior with regard to demographic information. So either they tended to disclose demographic information or rather not to disclose it. And we found that context information also forms such a group, where context information relates to computer usage. And then we did cluster analysis and tried to find groups of people whose disclosure behavior was very different between groups. And for instance, we found one group that disclosed quite a lot of information about themselves, both context and demographic information. And then another one that disclosed very little. And the differences are quite stark, so these are standard deviations. So these people disclose roughly 35% more than average, and these people disclose 50% less than average. We also found a middle group, and this looks a little bit like Westin's trichotomy, but then we found a fourth group that does not like to disclose context data, so computer usage, does not like being tracked, but has no troubles disclosing demographic data. I remember many years ago, Sarah Spiekermann found a group that she called tracking-averse users. We found the same here in this data set. Then we went one step further and looked at other characteristics that are kind of associated with group membership. And we just looked at many other personal data of these people. And we found that mobile internet usage is correlated in a very interesting way. Here you see the mobile internet's usage of this green group, the high disclosure group. And here you see the mobile internet usage of the red group, which is low disclosure group, and that's significantly different. If dots are linked here, that means there's no statistical significance. And this gives rise to suspicion that we may be able to predict membership of an individual in one of these disclosure groups based on other information about what we have about this person, like mobile internet usage. If we see someone's mobile internet usage is like this, he or she is likely to be in this disclosure group. So we don't have to watch people's disclosure completely in order to be able to predict how they would disclose. This kind of sounds promising. We looked at data from another experiment where we asked people about their likelihood to disclose personal data to an online retailer. And again, we asked many questions, what they would disclose or rather not disclose. And we then did factor analysis to find out types of data that people tended to disclose or not to disclose, and saw that health data formed one group, interests, work-related data, and contact data. And there are studies in the literature that showed that these data seemingly do form meaningful groups. Again, we did cluster analysis and came up with 4 meaningful clusters with regard to differences in disclosure behavior. So again, we have a low disclosure group here, but interestingly, this group has not so many concerns disclosing contact data. And here we have a high disclosure group, but these people do have concerns disclosing contact data. So the disclosure behavior with regard to different types of data is quite different. Here's the number of disclosed items that these people told us on average. And again, we looked at many other characteristics of people and found that in this case, age might be a predictor. So here you have older people in their 40s, and those people tended to be in the blue group here, in this disclosure group. Whereas purple here, these people tended to be in this disclosure group here. So again, we would have a simple way to tell from one piece of information that is relatively easily available what kind of disclosure behavior these people are likely to have. And now we also got a data set from a colleague who asked people about their willingness to disclose different types of data to Facebook. And again, we did factor analysis and found that 4 groups can be distinguished in a meaningful manner. What people did on their boards, location information, contact information, interests. And based on this, we did a cluster analysis again and found 5 meaningful clusters with very different disclosure behaviors again. Here, however, we did not have objective characteristics of people that we could correlate. Not much of such data had been collected, but we could correlate attitudinal data with group membership, like the answers of people to questions. Do you trust Facebook? People who trusted Facebook tended to disclose more data. People who distrusted Facebook tended to disclose less data. But as you can see, this is different between data type. And Facebook must ask for my permission before they change their privacy policy. People who agreed with that, that's the red group, people who disagreed with that disclosed more data than people who agreed with that. So this is first evidence that people's disclosures are kind of predictable. And if this turns out to be true, then there would be two directions to try to predict disclosure behavior and create personalized defaults. One is HCI direction, where you would do user studies before you deploy an application, and you do such user studies anyways. Microsoft runs more than 10,000 user studies before every new version of Office is put out, and one can allocate some of these studies to privacy matters. At runtime, then, you would try to find characteristics of people that predict their disclosure behavior and set privacy defaults for users. People could override these defaults. The information that people overrode their defaults frequently could be used for improving the prediction algorithm. And in regular intervals, you should also do these user studies again. So this would be more the HCI direction. But there is also a machine learning solution possible where you kind of get rid of those user studies and try to do everything at runtime. You can then get into something that's called cold start problem. So what you do you do right at the beginning if you don't have any data, but solutions can be found for that. So this would be a possible research avenue. If it succeeds, or also if other solutions in this direction succeed, this would also point out to new directions for privacy regulation that resembles a little bit regulation of pharmaceutical research, so clinical trials with drugs. Here you would also require companies that collect personal data, not only to describe the privacy practices, but also to do user research, and also to require that some support must be given to users to make privacy decisions if the company wants them to do privacy decisions. And this should not be done in secret, but rather results should be published. This is currently already the case in pharmaceutical research to some extent. It's standard in human-computer interaction. User interface designers have professional conferences where they exchange user interface design ideas. So this is done pre-competitively, and the same could be done in privacy research. Yeah, and once in a while, since people change, since cultures change, one would have to re-verify that results are still applicable. And privacy regulation would also then impose an accountability mandate. So people and companies would need to be required to follow best practices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alfred, for that, for summarizing your research results so clearly, and then also providing us a very clear way of leveraging those research results into implementation with policy implications. So I'd like to turn to Nicolas now to go back to the data ecosystems and then share with us some of the experiments and some of the initiatives that you've been leading to look at alternative and innovative uses of data.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. I'm from Orange, Nicolas Decordes, and Orange is a telecom company, so it's typically an ecosystem player, very active, very connected, and also historically, we didn't have to really look at the data. We don't monetize data as a business model. We are based on subscription. So this question of monetizing, doing something with the data that is going on the network is a little bit of a new question. So we address that question really sort of a very high level and say, okay, there are three ways, and it's a 101 summary of our strategy. There are three ways to monetize the data that we have on any of our customer and operations. The first and the most important one, it's by contract in our terms and conditions. It's to improve the service we offer to the customer. We call that the internal usage, okay? The second one, and it's a symbolic act to put it in the middle of the strategy, is to give it sort of back to the customer, to help them use this data to do new stuff. And I will give a little example of that at the end of my presentation. And then the third one, and that will be most of the presentation, it's to see how we can monetize it, but in a little bit of a different way. The priorities that we have are clearly on the first two columns, I would say, and the third one we should explore, but with caution, to find ways where we create value for the ecosystem or for society, but in a little bit of a different approach. So the project that I will show you is there in the bottom right box, which is doing sort of big data analysis with putting it more data in the outside of our company, sharing it with other institutions, people, and so on, to provide value to society. So what we wanted to try was to exploit some statistics that we have on our networks, the way we manage the network, the way calls are handled from one cell tower to another cell tower, to collect that information that typically we throw away. We have no usage of that, so that we collect it and give it to researchers and see if they could make up something with it. Okay, so these are the kind of thing when you go in a network analysis conference, that's the kind of maps that you see, and we say, well, it would be interested to try it on our network. Okay, but for a specific purpose. We didn't want to do that just like that. We wanted to do a project for development. So development, in a broadly speaking meaning of the word, anything that could help one of our subsidiary, one of the country where a subsidiary is, to help the country develop in a better way. And so we asked a question to our subsidiary. We have about 20 countries in Africa where we operate, and Ivory Coast said, yes, we would be interested to run that experiment. So here we are. We launched a challenge. We launched the challenge that was called Data for Development, and the challenge was about finding new use of data, maybe crossing the data that we have on the network with other sorts of data, with health data, with agriculture data, with whatever else, to see if we can find something useful. So we got the support of a very prestigious institution, also sort of leading institution in terms of what could we do with this data in a very respectful way, very privacy-safe way. And so we had the support of a university in Ivory Coast, the University of Bouaké, Global Pulse from the United Nations, which is sort of the big data for development institution of the UN. The GSMA, it's an organization of sort of cross-operator, cross-telecom organization. The MIT, of course, on R&D. The University of Louvain, where we have a professor who is really an expert in network analysis, and the World Economic Forum. So we launched a challenge, and the challenge was, the very first step was a challenge for us, was to say, okay, now we have data on that is about our network. How do we release information in a very, very safe way? What sort of data can we put out there that would be not crackable to find individuals? We're utterly, it's one of the highest priorities in Orange is to protect the privacy of our customers. And so what we did is that before exporting the data from Ivory Coast to our labs in Paris, we completely anonymized the data in Ivory Coast. So eliminating all the phone numbers, EMEA numbers, and every sort of number that would be unique and identified, replacing them by dummy numbers. And once that was done, it's still sensitive. You can still crack those sort of data, but that is sort of the first level anonymization that was allowing us to export the data into our labs. And from there, we started to prepare the data set to be able to release something to the research community. And so to give you an example of this data set, this is this little matrix that we have there. It's just the number of calls per hour between antenna. So you have seen a map of Ivory Coast. All these little dots were our antennas. So we gave the geolocation of every antenna we have in the country. And this number that you see in the matrix, let's say 23, is just that there has been 23 phone calls or SMS sent from one antenna to another antenna. That's all we provide in that database. We have 5 months of data. So every hours, there was one matrix of 1,250 antenna in lines and columns. So you have about 3,500 of these matrix. That was one data set, okay? So we're talking big data. But this is the sort of very anonymized information that we release. And before releasing them, we asked 2 universities to try to crack them, find ways to identify unique individuals. And so they were friendly users, and they worked on it, and they gave us their sort of recommendation. And we took that into account. For instance, they found very extreme users. There was one person that was at one time, at 1 hour under a certain antenna, and the next hour, he was a few hundred kilometers further than that. And so that was probably someone, we don't know, but probably someone who took a plane. So if there is anyone in the world who could get access to the list of passengers of that hour between those 2 antennas, he could find a way to find that person. It was a small sample of person that we used. So we said, oh, that's much too much. So let's eliminate this sort of extreme case. Another example of that was at 3 o'clock in the morning in the north of the country where you have national park. There were like 2 or 3 phones that were, on. And that was too sensitive because it might be the guardians of the national park. So let's eliminate those extreme users. And so we had a long list of eliminating everything that was extreme to then have a data set which we accumulate, compact, and release to the community. So we were hoping to have 50 teams that would take on the challenge and try to do something. And we were overwhelmed by the results. So we had more than 260 universities and research labs in the world who took the challenge. And they say, wow, fantastic. That was a first in the world. And so they were really, the competition spirit and also the for development objective was quite exciting. So overwhelming response. So all in all, we had about 83 submissions that were in time for the contest, and among the best ones were published in the Nature journal. So they were really excellent quality of papers. So what did we got? We got all sorts of analysis, and we were really completely surprised by the variety and the creativity of the researcher working with that data to find new usage of that. So things about community understanding, emergency response, transport planning, tourism, event analysis, and you have those kind of papers. They are publicly available. It was in the terms of condition of the contract. Every paper that will be used for this challenge will be put on the web and freely available for everyone to look at. So Google them, you will find them. It's freely downloadable. So some example of those. So the first there on the upper left is this orange maps. It's the first map of a poverty index by prefecture. So they have made some statistics by region. There are about 10 regions in Ivory Coast, and they evaluate a poverty index. And that specific researcher took that statistic that he had, correlated that with the activity of our network in the same region, find the correlation, and then went back into the regional level. There are 332 regions in Ivory Coast, and so this is the first map of poverty by regions, which is extremely useful, to orient the funding, the development, the aid, to find correlation between that and, sickness or whatever. Extremely useful information. He was very, very cautious to say this is just, one exercise with a data set that was compacted. I don't know exactly how. Certainly lots of bias, but it is possible. It is possible. So with extra research, we could define a very, very cheap way to find poverty index by region, by antenna level of some sort. The next one was comparison between cities. So here you have Abidjan compared to Beijing, Chicago, Seattle. There's been also comparison between the whole of Ivory Coast and Portugal, and all sort of index, mobility, structure of social networks, all sort of things. But one thing that was quite interesting was the patterns of week versus weekend work. We see on our networks very, very distinctive call patterns that are typically business behavior. You know, you call, and you have the lunch pause, and then you end up at 6 o'clock, and you have all these sort of waves of calls that appears on the network. On the weekend, it's different. And so in Portugal, you have the whole country. It's week, weekend. There is a beat, a weekly beat. In Ivory Coast, not at all. So you have the cities who have exactly the same pattern, week, weekend. They are, you know, sophisticated people. They work, they have a, you know, industry, service, and whatever. In the countryside, nothing like that. You don't distinguish a Sunday from a Tuesday or whatever. It means that you can develop a new statistical indicator that would be the development of some form of service in a country. You would see pretty much a sort of the place where it starts to have this sort of weekly beats. So new national indicators. Another example was the upper right maps, where they're very practical. Someone invented a system to crowdsource the transport of packets, and he demonstrated, it's a model that says this could be, you know, for free. In less than a week, you can bring a packet for free in any spot in Ivory Coast. So now it should be, you know, realized. There should be this station to pick package and whatever, but it is theoretically proven. Then among our favorites are on the bottom side. So you have 3 examples, but there were many. There were like about 20 projects looking at health, and we have had analysis on AIDS, cholera, malaria, meningitis, and so on. So this guy cross the data they got from the World Health Organization and the mobility pattern that they can detect with information on our networks. And they say, okay, how would a sickness spread? Can we improve the prediction of where when a disease starts, where it's going to go first? And which population we should inform? Where should we send our, you know, the medicine? Where should we send the mosquito nets and those sort of things? So that was a category that appeared, and that was extremely interesting. And then you have on the bottom right, lots of project also on transport and logistics, which is one of the most important development questions in those countries. I mean, if a city is fluid, a city develops. And so if, I don't know how many of you goes in Africa every now and then, but you know that you don't move. You are in a traffic jam and you can stay an hour or two just not moving. So how can you improve that? And this is a way to see where people go. So there were a number of winners, but to just name one that was in the upper right, it was the lab of IBM in Dublin. They really modelized the city of Abidjan. They had very practical recommendation. If you want to develop a new ferry line, please put it there, because that's where it would most help the city to work better. Please increase the length of this specific bus and train tramways, public transport, because that's where people are waiting for a train or a line. And so we had these 4 winners that were selected among all these players. So there are social network analysis, health analysis, transportation, and data visualization, to have people to speak with data. So we got a very good press. So we were very happy because, frankly, we were afraid. We had, you don't know how many discussion and hours of discussion with our subsidiary over there. The thing we were afraid of was this sort of big brother article. Oh, the bad orange is looking at you and those kind of things. So we had 22 versions of the public, the press release. 22. And so we're targeting also some institutions, NGOs, and not making too much noise. But actually, the story was picked up at a conference where we presented the result. It was at the MIT, and we had very, very positive press, where with an overwhelming message saying, okay, if it's well anonymized, then it's really, really worth doing it. We should find ways in policies and regulation and behavior and work ethics and all those sort of things to make this possible, because there is too much value for the populations. Of course, now we are going back in the countries, trying to implement those things, and I'm very happy to announce that 2 weeks ago, I got the go-ahead from a second country of our subsidiaries. So Senegal, we're launching the same project, Do It Again, Better, Bigger, with Senegal. Sorry for that. I finish with one slide that was a sort of, you remembered you had a middle column in a strategy. So this middle column is about giving back the information to the customer. So this is not theory. We are now working with a group of players. So here we are. So there are banks, there is a retail chain, Google is there. We have the La Poste in France. It's called Mes Infos. It's like My Data in the UK. And we have created a database of course, in that case, opt-in, fully signed, triple-checked opt-in by the customer, and all these players are putting their data in one database, very, very secure and protected, but each individual will have access to his own data, and for instance, we give the location. So in that case, it requires us to set up a specific system because we don't track people. But for this specific experimentation, we build a system so that people can say, okay, I want to have a tracking of myself. So every 10 minutes, we poll where to see where he is. And we give that just in a sort of a file format to this database. Everybody is doing the same. So to give you a feeling of the sensitivity of the data, the banks that are participating give the detail of the bank account. So your salary is in there, all your expenses is in there, and so on. And on top of this data, we are building services that will be given back, very, very private service, giving back to the user. So you cannot imagine the hours of discussion that we had between the partners and how to do, and it's done with the CNIL, so the National Authority of Protection of Civil Liberties and so on, and Internet and Liberties in France, to authorize this thing. And but hopefully this is going very well so far. Go on the web; it's available. The result will be made public. It's really enabling an ecosystem to appear, and so that will be quite interesting to see, to look at the result. In a few months, in Q2, we will communicate all the results and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicolas. And before we open up to the floor, I just want to ask Rosa to give a 1-minute feedback on, because you had started out, are these the kind of projects and types of research activities that you think are helpful to your thinking? And an indication of that, I think, will be very helpful. And then, of course, we'd like to hear from the floor as well.
Yes, thank you for these presentations. I thought that both exercises were very interesting, a lot of food for thought. And I think these are the sort of things that are very relevant. If I have to pick one, for example, on your side, it came to mind, number one, that the fact that you put all these safeguards, privacy safeguards in order to collect, I think it would be interesting to see what you, with more detail, what you do, which allow you to do it in a way. And second, and it also demonstrates that this project was done in France, in Paris, subject to existing laws, and is lawful, and you got an okay from the NIL, which is quite interesting, because it means that to reap the benefits of big data, we seem to have a legislation that is fit for the purpose, which I think is something, to me, quite interesting. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have about 7 minutes. I'd like to see if there are any questions from the audience. Nobody? There's a question behind.
To Orange. Did you take the advice of the CNIL in Senegal? Because there is one. Okay, fine. And secondly, do you think the way you described how you took off raw data of people who were seeing as being recognized if those data were in other hands. Do you think all the people who are doing big data for the moment are taking such precautions? Do you think it can be a professional rule? I have much doubt today. What you did seems quite okay, but I have much doubts about others.
I agree with you. So this is, it's a new field, and everything needs to be invented. So part of the result of this project will be to publish to the other operators, and we're working on that with the help of the MIT, the GSMA, to write a sort of a format and a good process for anonymization of data so that we can release this sort of data, which is highly aggregated. It's very partial, but it helps to have the ball rolling. But now what needs also obviously to be done is to set up the environment, the working and policy environment for different sort of contexts. And just to simplify the story, I see 3 contexts in which we should be able to operate. The first one is research. And for instance, the CNIL, they made a clear difference between a project that you release to research team, universities with a well-functioning team and works ethics and so on, and other situation. The second situation will be industrialized process for which you are going to collect data in a continuous way and so on. That needs to be much more tight because there will be much more people accessing this sort of data, and in a continuous basis, it's a more critical process. And so we have one product that is collecting data that has been co-developed, literally co-developed with the CNIL. And it's a process that is anonymizing in real time and creating statistics in real time. We don't keep information. We just create the KPIs that a client would need. And so it goes by slice of 15 minutes. And every 15 minutes, we delete everything. So it's pretty much safe. So we got there okay. So, but there are industrialized process where we need other set of regulation. And then there is this exceptional situation in terms of really disaster. So we have this example in IT, and there has been, tsunamis and whatever. In those circumstances, there is none so far, a well-structured process where operators, for instance, could release data of before, during, and after the disaster to help the support forces operate on the local level, because this sort of situation would require detailed personal data, keeping the phone numbers in place. And these are extremely useful to help people in situation of crisis, but it requires, as everybody understands in the room, extreme precautions and destruction of data afterwards. But these are three families of usage that require specific sort of rules of conduct to enable them to operate well.
Time, one more question.
My name is Haru Takasaki from Japan KDDI, telecom operator. I'm asking Dr. Kobusa. So your excellent paper is very, very useful for our developing a personal privacy policy management system. So my question is, as you said that for understanding the customers' preferences, so you mentioned about the factor analysis, but for implementing the algorithms, just not only the static evaluation model not so suitable for every time so customers change the decisions. So for more dynamically understanding the customer's action or evaluations, so it's necessary to more dynamic analysis of preferences. How do you think about this?
Yeah, to kind of tune it a little bit down. Currently, we only assign people to disclosure groups. And so this is a coarse prediction of their likely privacy disclosure. However, at the same time, we try to become more ambitious, also to do dynamic, continuous machine learning. This would then indeed be continuous. The behavior in the distant past would get discarded or at least downplayed, and more recent behavior would be taken into higher consideration. We have no results with that yet, so I do not want to proclaim too much, but this would be the direction that we are currently going.
Thank you. It's 6 o'clock, so I think we don't have any more time for questions. So I think I'm going to abuse my position as a chair and just pick on the two things that I think was the most interesting takeaway, at least from my perspective, is Rosa asked the question at the beginning, so shall we forget about consent? Is it that really? My takeaway is that we need both legislation and technology, because if we limit legislation, as Alfred was suggesting, to those cases where it's really meaningful, which in my opinion is the case with the 95 directive with the most sensitive data, consent can be meaningful and useful. On the other hand, there are technology solutions for any other cases, or could be that could help the user to make meaningful choices and have a meaningful way of excluding consent. No, we're not agreeing. But I guess we can discuss that after. The second takeaway was what you said, actually, Andreas, was how do we remember the principles and how do we get back to the principles when we think about big data, like data minimization, which is a clear example that Orange was doing. So I think if we think about those and think about how the 95 directive allows this kind of research and allows this kind of use of big data, I'm just throwing out the question whether any new legislation, the way it goes right now, would allow us similar research. With that, I would like to take one more announcement, which is another similar session that would present the Microsoft research along the line of what we heard from Nicolas today. It's the session called Taking Data to the Street, and it's about research and use of big data in analyzing how people in one street use data and how we can translate that data into the best social benefit. And that session starts at 8 o'clock. It's at Maison des Arts, voilà. So all of you are very welcome to attend that session too. Thank you very much for coming and listening to us.